There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the reflection in the mirror no longer feels like you. You look at the face, familiar yet foreign, and realize that every decision, every compromise, every surrender has carved its mark upon it. Behind the practiced smile and the exhausted eyes, something whispers. This is not who you were meant to be. It's not an accusation. It's a remembrance, a faint echo from the soul before it was tamed. Most people turn away from that mirror. They bury the question under routines, relationships, and responsibilities. They convince themselves that they have found themselves, when in truth they have merely constructed a comfortable disguise. But the question remains, sharp as a splinter in the mind. Who am I really? Nietzsche called this the most dangerous question a human being can ask. Because once asked, it begins to unravel everything. It tears through the layers of conformity, morality, and inherited belief until only a trembling will remains, alone, staring into the abyss of possibility. He wrote, "Become who you are, not as advice but as a command, a summons to battle." These 4 words are not gentle. They are a declaration of war on the false self, the social self, the obedient self. To become who you are is to enter the desert of your own becoming, where no one can walk beside you. Yet we misunderstand Nietzsche if we think he was glorifying mere self-expression or indulgence. Be yourself is the slogan of comfort. Become who you are is the cry of transformation. It demands suffering. It demands honesty. It demands the death of everything in you that is imitation. Imagine the sculptor standing before a block of marble. Inside it, he senses a form struggling to emerge, a figure trapped within the stone. His task is not to create it, but to reveal it. Every strike of the chisel is an act of violence and revelation. Each blow removes what does not belong. That is what Nietzsche meant by becoming. The ruthless chiseling away of everything false until the essential self stands free. But how do we know what in us is false? Nietzsche's answer is brutal, through confrontation with suffering. Pain is the most honest mirror. It exposes the lies we tell ourselves, the masks we wear to survive. He believed that suffering is not an obstacle to becoming. It is the forge in which the self is tempered. To flee from pain is to flee from transformation. He saw modern man as domesticated, tamed by comfort, morality, and the illusion of equality. In his eyes, most people live as shadows of themselves, seeking safety rather than greatness, happiness rather than depth. And so he asked, what would it mean to live as a work of art, rather than a copy? There's something haunting about that question, because it suggests that authenticity isn't found, it's forged, that the self is not a static truth waiting to be discovered, but a creation that demands courage, rebellion, and solitude. Nietzsche's challenge is not for everyone. It's for those who have heard the quiet, unbearable feeling that they are living beneath their potential, not in talent, but in being. It's for those who feel that life has become too small for the soul inside them. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." A privilege, yes, but also a burden, for it requires you to step outside the life you've built and to risk losing everything that once made you feel safe. The mirror does not lie. It only waits. And one day, when you are brave enough to look long enough, you will realize the face staring back at you is still unfinished. To become who you are means to begin again. The path toward becoming who you are does not begin with clarity. It begins with chaos. Nietzsche knew this intimately. He saw the human being not as a harmonious unity, but as a battlefield of competing forces, instincts, desires, fears, and ideals locked in eternal conflict. Every choice, every hesitation, every belief we cling to is a trace of that inner war. We are not simple beings trying to find balance. We are creatures of contradiction trying to survive our own depths. That's why he warned, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos is not an enemy. It is the raw material of creation. Yet most of us have been taught to suppress it, to hide from it, to silence it in the name of stability. We seek peace when what we truly need is transformation. The tragedy of modern life, Nietzsche believed, is not that people suffer. but that they suffer for the wrong reasons. We suffer to maintain illusions, to fit into molds, to keep relationships alive that no longer nourish us, to appear good in the eyes of others. This kind of suffering does not elevate, it diminishes. It makes us small, predictable, and obedient. Real suffering, the kind that leads to becoming, feels different. It burns with meaning. It dismantles illusions with merciless precision. It strips away comfort, pride, and certainty, leaving only what cannot be destroyed. It's not the suffering of the victim. It's the suffering of the artist who refuses to stop until the truth has shape. This is why Nietzsche despised mediocrity more than immorality. To him, the truly dangerous thing was not evil, it was conformity. The average person, in his eyes, was not bad but unawakened. They lived as reflections of society's expectations, wearing borrowed identities like uniforms. He saw them as victims of what he called herd morality, a collective hypnosis that prizes safety over greatness, obedience over individuality. And yet, Nietzsche did not simply condemn the herd. He pitied it, for he knew that escaping it requires more than rebellion. It requires rebirth. To break free from the herd is to walk into loneliness. To lose the approval of others is to lose the illusion of belonging. But in that loneliness lies the possibility of sovereignty, the birth of the self that no longer depends on external validation to exist. It's easy to romanticize this. Many talk about being different, about standing out. But Nietzsche was not speaking to the ego that wants to feel special. He was speaking to the spirit that dares to transform, even when it costs everything. Because transformation is not glamorous. It is disorienting. You begin to question your beliefs, your desires, even your dreams. You realize that many of your ambitions were never truly yours, that they were planted in you by family, culture, religion, or fear. You start to see how much of your life was an unconscious performance. And that realization hurts. It's no wonder most people retreat. They'd rather be comfortably asleep in the dream of identity than awake in the storm of becoming. But Nietzsche would say, if you run from that storm, you run from yourself. The transformation begins when you stop seeking happiness and start seeking truth. When you stop asking, how can I be accepted? And begin asking, what is true in me, even if no one else accepts it? Sigmund Freud once wrote, one day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. Perhaps he meant that the pain of becoming is not wasted. It is sacred. It is the proof that you have lived, not as a shadow of others, but as the sculptor of your own soul. The war within is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to awaken you. And once you begin to fight not against yourself, but for yourself, you start to glimpse something rare, something terrifying, freedom. Freedom not as pleasure, but as the weight of self-creation. The question is, what will you do with it? There comes a point in every life where resistance breaks. The old certainties, beliefs, ambitions, moral codes collapse under the unbearable gravity of truth. What once defined you becomes too small to contain what you are becoming. Feels like death because in a way it is. For centuries, people anchored their existence in divine purpose, in the idea that morality and destiny came from beyond. But when that faith dies, something terrifying happens. The weight of meaning falls back onto you. You are now the author of your own values, the creator of your own purpose. This is the essence of Nietzsche's transformation, the birth of the Übermensch, the one who dares to create meaning in a meaningless world. Not a superhuman, but a fully human being who has faced the abyss and refused to look away. But facing the abyss is not a metaphor. It is an experience that strips the soul bare. It is the dark night when the world loses color, when every pursuit feels hollow, when you can no longer hide behind ideals or identities. The ground beneath you dissolves, and you realize there is no map, no guidance, only the raw demand to become. It is here that many break. They seek distraction, numbness, anything to avoid the silence of the void. Yet Nietzsche would say, this silence is sacred. It is the crucible where your truest form begins to take shape. To endure that silence is to endure the fire that burns without consuming. In that fire, the false self dies, the self that lived for recognition, for approval, for belonging. What remains is the core, the still, unyielding spark that existed before the world named you. Nietzsche saw this as the birth of self-overcoming, the act of turning one's own suffering into strength, of transforming pain into creation. He believed that those who have suffered deeply are closest to greatness, not because pain is good, but because it is honest. It reveals the limits of the old self and demands transcendence. "What does not kill me," he wrote, "makes me stronger." But strength, for Nietzsche, was not physical endurance. It was spiritual resilience, the courage to keep creating meaning even when everything collapses. To become who you are is to take responsibility for your existence. It is to accept that no savior is coming. No system will redeem you, no ideology will tell you who to be. It is to carry the burden of freedom alone and willingly. But out of that loneliness grows something extraordinary: sovereignty. You begin to realize that the chaos within you is not a curse, but a canvas. The contradictions, the wounds, the doubts, they are the materials of your becoming. You are not here to erase them, but to weave them into something beautiful. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To become whole, you must confront the shadow, the parts of yourself you've exiled, denied, or despised. They are not enemies to destroy, but fragments of truth waiting to be integrated. When you stop running from your darkness, you discover a strange light hidden inside it, the light of self-knowledge. Transformation, then, is not the escape from suffering. It is the transfiguration of it. It is the alchemy of turning what once broke you into the very force that builds you. You begin to see that the abyss does not stare back to frighten you. It stares back to reflect your potential. The old self dies, but in its ashes, something begins to rise. Not perfect, not complete, but becoming. When the fire subsides and the ashes cool, something remarkable begins to emerge. A quiet clarity, a kind of inner gravity that feels both unfamiliar and ancient. You realize that transformation was never about becoming someone else. It was about returning to what was most deeply, most secretly you. This is the paradox Nietzsche leaves us with. To become who you are, you must first lose who you think you are. It's a process not of addition, but of subtraction. You shed illusions, roles, attachments, until what remains cannot be taken away. And what remains is not a fixed identity, but a living principle, a will that creates, renews, and dares to affirm life even in its cruelty. For Nietzsche, this affirmation is everything. To say yes to life, even when it wounds you, even when it denies your expectations, that is the highest act of strength. It is not blind optimism. It is the wisdom of one who has looked directly into despair and whispered, "Still, I choose to live." He called this the amor fati, the love of one's fate. To love not only the joy and the victory, but also the loss, the heartbreak, the failure. To say to every moment, "This too was necessary," because without it, you would not have become what you are now. In this sense, the self is not a destination but a dance, a movement between death and rebirth, destruction and creation. Nietzsche envisioned the Übermensch not as a distant ideal, but as a dancer, graceful in chaos, unbroken by contradiction. To live as art, he believed, is to turn even tragedy into beauty. Imagine a life lived with that kind of creative defiance, where every mistake becomes a brushstroke, every heartbreak a deeper color, every fall a part of the composition. A life where you no longer ask, "Why did this happen to me?" but rather, "What can I make of this?" This is what it means to affirm existence, to become the artist of your own suffering, the composer of your own contradictions. But such affirmation cannot come from intellect alone. It is not a philosophy you understand, it's a truth you embody. It lives in how you walk through the world, how you meet pain without bitterness, how you carry solitude without despair. Nietzsche believed that once you pass through the fire, the world itself begins to change. Not because the world has transformed, but because you have. You start to see beauty where others see nothing. You feel wonder in the ordinary. Even suffering becomes meaningful, because you no longer resist it, you transmute it. Albert Camus would later echo this spirit when he wrote, "In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. That is the heart of transformation. Not escaping the winter, but discovering the warmth that endures beneath it. To become who you are is to live without disguise. It means you no longer perform your life, you inhabit it. You stop chasing approval because your worth no longer depends on being seen. You stop fearing change because you've learned that everything you lose merely clears space for what is real. This is not serenity, it is intensity. It is life lived at full voltage, stripped of pretense, vibrating with authenticity. The self that emerges from transformation is not calm, it is alive. And yet, with this aliveness comes humility, because you realize that the journey never ends. Every arrival reveals a new beginning. Every self you become contains the seed of another transformation. The artist never stops shaping the sculpture. The fire never fully dies. And maybe that's the beauty of it, that there is no final form. Only this endless act of becoming, moment by moment, breath by breath, turning the raw chaos of existence into something radiant, tragic, and true. There is a silence that follows great storms, a stillness so deep it almost feels sacred. After the chaos of transformation, after the burning away of everything false, that silence arrives, not as comfort but as revelation. You look around and realize the landscape of your inner world has changed forever. The noise of comparison fades. The endless hunger for recognition quiets. You no longer crave to be understood because you have learned to understand yourself. And that, Nietzsche would say, is freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from wanting what does not belong to you. Freedom from imitation, from the tyranny of ideals that were never your own. The freedom of standing alone and not flinching. To become who you are is to stand naked before existence, without excuse, without mask, without need for justification. It's to accept that your life is not a rehearsal for something greater. This is the play, this breath, this failure, this triumph. You are the author, the actor, and the audience all at once. And yet, this realization is not triumphant. It is humbling. Because once you glimpse your own vastness, you also glimpse your fragility. You see how easily you could have remained asleep, how close you were to never awakening at all. You begin to feel compassion, not the shallow empathy of pity, but the deep compassion born of understanding how difficult it is simply to live truthfully. For Nietzsche, compassion did not mean weakness. It meant the strength to love life without illusion, to affirm even what wounds you, to say yes to existence, with all its cruelty and beauty intertwined. He imagined the highest spirit as one who could look upon every moment of their life, every mistake, every regret, every heartbreak, and say, let it return. Let it happen again eternally. This was his great thought experiment, the eternal recurrence, the question that tests the soul. If you had to live the same life, exactly as it has been, for all eternity, would you curse it or would you bless it? If you can say yes even once, you have become who you are. Because that yes is not to the world as it should be, it is to the world as it is. It is a surrender that is not defeat, but transcendence. A surrender so complete it becomes creation again. Most people will never reach this. They will circle endlessly through half-lived lives, terrified of both suffering and greatness. They will obey, imitate, conform because the cost of becoming is too high. But for the few who dare, something magnificent awaits. Not happiness, not peace, but wholeness. Wholeness is not the absence of pain. It is the integration of it. It is knowing that every scar is an inscription of your becoming. Every loss is a sculptor's strike, revealing more of the form within. And perhaps that is the final secret Nietzsche left us. Not that we must find meaning in life, but that we must create it. That existence itself is neutral, and it is only through our courage, our suffering, and our imagination that we transform it into art. When the mirror calls again, and you will not turn away. You will stand before it, unafraid. The reflection will no longer accuse you. It will recognize you, not as perfect, not as complete, but as true. There is no applause for this kind of victory, no witness, no reward. Only the quiet knowledge that you did not betray your own becoming. The silence returns. But now it feels different. It is no longer emptiness. It is fullness, the sound of a soul at peace with its storm. You have not escaped life. You have entered it completely, and somewhere in that vast, unending stillness, the words resound once more. Become who you are.